Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we are going to talk about some queer books for Pride Month. Before we get started, a couple of things. First, I know it's been a couple of months since I have uploaded any videos, but life just sort of got in the way. I was very busy at work. I have two jobs. I have my main 9 to 5 job, and then I also teach a course a couple times a year at a local university. And combined together, along with some traveling that I was doing, I just have not been able to film or edit or upload anything. So thank you for those who are sticking with me, and I will try to be as regular as I can going forward. Second, I know that I've been doing every now and again some Heritage Month celebrations, but I just want to point out that we should be reading diversely all year long, whether it's, for Women's History Month or Black History Month or Pride Month or whatever it is. We should be reading diversely. However, it is nice to use these months as a check-in to, make sure that we are reading as diversely as possible. And last, before Pride Month was a glittery celebration of love and acceptance, it started out as a protest with the queer community, literally fighting for their lives. And they are still fighting to exist to this day and be seen, especially under the current administration. So just wanted to point that out when you are celebrating your Pride celebrations. So today we are going to talk about some queer books that are on my TBR. I will try to do a separate video. I don't know if it'll be for June or in the near future about queer books that I have already read and recommend. But today we are going to talk about some books that I have not read yet. I've got 5 nonfiction and 5 fiction, and it was really hard to narrow down this list to only 10. I mean, we could be here all day. I've got so many suggestions. However, I narrowed it down to 10, and I decided that these are the ones that I am the most excited about to pick up. So we are going to start with my nonfiction selections. And the first being Scotch Verdict by Lillian Faderman. And Faderman is a well-known queer historian and has written many books specifically on lesbian history. And this was originally published in 1983, and this book has been on my radar for about 15 years. So about 15 years ago, I performed as Karen Wright in a play called The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman. And The Children's Hour is a play about 2 school teachers in the 1930s whose lives and careers were destroyed after an angry student tells her grandmother that the teachers are lesbians. Hellman based the play on a real-life legal case that was litigated in the early 1800s in Scotland. And in that case, a student tells her powerful grandmother that her schoolmistresses had an affair in the presence of the students. So the grandmother, who is powerful, ensures that all her friends and acquaintances remove their daughters from this school, thus depriving the 2 school teachers of their livelihood. What resulted from that was a libel suit filed by the teachers against the grandmother, which then led to what is called Scotch Verdict. And this is a verdict of not proven or an inconclusive decision. Through court transcripts, judges' notes, and her personal reflections on the witnesses' contradictory testimony and the prejudices of the men presiding over the case, Faderman skillfully documents the social, economic, and sexual pressures that shaped the lives of 19th century women. So I am looking forward to getting to this. I have known about this book for about 15 years, but I only just this past year managed to snag this used copy. Next on my nonfiction list, Love Letters of Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville-West. Now, we all know who Virginia Woolf is. She's the author of Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, and the author of such great essays as A Room of One's Own. Well, in the early 1920s, Woolf, who I think was pretty, she was a writer, but I don't know if she was as well known, met Vita Sackville-West, who was an aristocrat who was an already popular author of books such as The Edwardians and All Passions Spent. I have copies of both of those books. I have not read them yet. And she was also a notorious Sapphist. So Vita and Virginia embarked on a 20-year, period of correspondence, flirting, friendship. I'm not entirely sure whether they had a sexual affair or not, but I believe they did. So please correct me if I'm wrong. And Woolf even wrote her novel Orlando for and about Vita. So Vita Sackville-West, apart from Virginia Woolf, was a very fascinating person, having had many affairs with women and even writing a memoir about some of her early affairs. The memoir wasn't published until the 1970s after she had died. And in this memoir, she appears to struggle with the duality of being bisexual. So on the one hand, she felt completely normal and it was natural for her. But then on the other hand, she sometimes felt like a deviant. I have not read that memoir. Anyway, back to Vita and Virginia. Intimate and teasing, these letters and diaries allow us to hear their shifting feelings for each other in their own words. Eavesdrop on the affair that inspired Virginia to write Orlando and discover an extraordinary relationship which, even 100 years later, feels radical and relatable. Next is Nothing Ever Just Disappears, 7 Hidden Queer Histories by Diarmuid Hester. And this is a history of 7 queer lives and the locations that shaped them. Out of probably all the books on this list, I'm actually most excited to read this one. Nothing Ever Just Disappears brings to life the stories of 7 remarkable figures and illuminates the connections between where they lived, who they loved, and the art they created. It shows that a queer sense of place is central to the history of the 20th century and powerfully evokes how much is lost when queer spaces are forgotten. And so the 7 people covered in here, we've got E.M. Forster in Cambridge, London's queer suffragettes, Josephine Baker and Paris, Claude Cahun's Jersey, James Baldwin between America and France, Jack Smith and New York, and Kevin Killian's San Francisco. Next, we have The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister, and there are 2 volumes here, and these were edited by Helena Whitbread. Now, Anne Lister was an English landowner and diarist in the early to mid 19th century. She basically defied standards for women at the time because she was very independent. She was a landowner, she was a traveler, and she lived pretty openly as a lesbian. And she's even been dubbed as the first modern lesbian. So Lister had some early relationships during her school days. She apparently was very androgynous in her appearance. She always wore black. People called her Gentleman Jack, and I'm sure it wasn't, meant to be a compliment. Her final significant relationship was with a woman named Anne Walker, who she married in 1834 at Holy Trinity Church in Goodramgate, York, which is celebrated, this church is celebrated as the birthplace of lesbian marriage in Britain. And I believe there's actually even a plaque outside of this church indicating that. And how Lister and Walker married each other was they went to church on Easter and they took communion together. And so that to them was their marriage. And they lived together at Lister's home until Lister died in 1840. Lister wrote many of her diaries in code, which included graphic details of her lesbian relationships, and those diaries were not actually decoded until many years after her death. And I think Helena Whitbread is responsible for I don't know if she cracked the code, but she did do a lot of the deciphering and then publishing these diaries in, I believe, the 1980s. Now, Lister's diaries weren't all sex. They contained a lot of information about life at that time in England. So I'm sure that they were a great resource for daily life of an independent woman in England of that time. Next, we have Hijab Butch Blues, a memoir by Lamya H. And this is a memoir of a queer hijabi Muslim immigrant. And each chapter focuses on a figure from the Quran and how that story relates to Lamya's life and how she tries to understand her identity and build a supporting community. Lamya is, I believe, a pseudonym, and I don't think we actually know the identity of this author. All that I was able to find is that she was born in an Urdu-speaking country, then moved to a rich Arab country, and is now a writer and activist in New York City. So I am definitely intrigued by this memoir. Okay, so now we are moving on to fiction. And the first fiction is A Regiment of Women by Clemence Dane. And this was first published in 1917. And this was Dane's debut novel, which gained notoriety for its veiled treatment of lesbian relationships. And this is set in a boarding school. And it is a story about an obsessive friendship triangle between a schoolmistress, a teacher, and a student. Claire Hartill is a brilliant, commanding educator at a private all-girls boarding school, the undisputed queen of her own small kingdom. But her tightly controlled world is disrupted when she meets Alwyn Durand, a 19-year-old teacher with no formal training. Alwyn's innocence and openness endear her to the secretive Claire, as Alwyn is drawn to Claire's intelligence and sophistication. The two women fall headlong into an all-consuming friendship and begin planning their life together. But their relationship is tested when an exceptionally gifted student named Louise enters their orbit. Louise will do anything to win Claire's approval. Meanwhile, Claire's jealous and manipulative nature slowly pulls Alwyn away from her friends, her students, and her family. Anyone, in fact, who is not Claire Hartill. The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and this is a queer fantasy novel featuring themes of love, acceptance, and family. Linus Baker, a caseworker for a government agency that monitors magical children who are in orphanages or other types of homes, and he is charged with following up on incidents, reports, and making suggestions as to what will happen to the children and the home. Linus is summoned by extremely upper management and given a curious and highly classified assignment: travel to an orphanage on a distant island and determine whether 6 dangerous magical children are so dangerous, in fact, that they're likely to bring about the end of days. When Linus arrives at the strangest of islands, he is greeted by a series of mysterious figures, the greatest mystery of which is Arthur Parnassus, the master of the orphanage. As Linus and Arthur grow closer, Linus discovers the master would do anything to keep the children safe, even if it means the world has to burn, or worse, his secret comes to life. I've heard this to be described as kind of cozy fantasy, despite the dangerous magical children. And the blurb on the front kind of got me, and it's by V.E. Schwab, and V.E. Schwab said, "I loved it. It is like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket. Simply perfect." Now, I generally don't pay attention to blurbs, but I did like that one, so I am looking forward to reading this one. Next is The Guncle by Stephen Rowley, and I just love this cover. It just makes me so happy. It feels very summerish, so maybe I'll try to get to it this summer. Patrick, or Gay Uncle Patrick, Gup for short, has always loved his niece Maisie and nephew Grant. That is, he loves spending time with them when they come out to Palm Springs for week-long visits or when he heads home to Connecticut for the holidays. So when tragedy strikes and Patrick finds himself suddenly taking on the role of primary guardian, he is honestly overwhelmed. Patrick has no idea what to expect, having spent years barely holding on after the loss of his great love, a somewhat stalled acting career, and a lifestyle not so suited to a 9- and 6-year-old. But when his waggish set of Guncle rules no longer appease Maisie and Grant's parental void, Patrick's eyes are opened to a new sense of responsibility and the realization that sometimes even being larger than life means you're unfailingly human. Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated by Julia Sanchez. This was recently, I believe in 2023, shortlisted for the International Booker and has made its rounds on BookTube, and I've heard nothing but good things about it. So I do really want to get to this, and it's a slim little thing, so I should be able to get through it rather quickly. A cook on a merchant ship comes to know and love Samsa, a woman who gives her the name Boulder. When Samsa gets a job in Reykjavik and the couple decides to move in together, Samsa declares that she wants to have a child now that they are settled. She is already 40 and can't bear to let the opportunity pass her by. Boulder is less enthused, but doesn't know how to say no, and so finds herself dragged along on a journey that feels as thankless to her as it is alien. With motherhood changing Samsa into a stranger, Boulder must decide where her priorities lie and whether her yearning for love can ever truly trump her yearning for freedom. So, Boulder by Eva Baltasar. And last, we have A Green Equinox by Elizabeth Mavor, or Mavor, I'm not entirely sure. This was shortlisted for the Booker in 1973, and I believe it came out of print a couple of times. I think it was revived by Virago in 2023, and this edition I have here is from McNally, so it's now making the rounds again, being republished. And this is about Hero Canal is an antiquarian bookseller whose sedate life in the picturesque English town of Beaudesert is turned upside down between the spring and summer equinoxes of a single year. First, her quiet but forbidden liaison with Hugh Shafto, the curator of the country's finest collection of Rococo art, comes to an abrupt halt when she develops an adoration for his straight-talking, do-gooding wife, Belle. But this relationship leads to other, even more unexpected feelings for Belle's widowed mother-in-law, the majestic Kate Shafto, who spends her days tending her garden and sailing her handmade boats in the waters of the miniature archipelago she's constructed in a disused gravel pit. So this sounds really, really interesting. So I am looking forward to getting to this. So that is it. 10 queer books for Pride, 5 fiction, 5 nonfiction. Have you read any of these? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Which ones should I prioritize? Thank you so much for joining and sticking with me, even though I've been gone for a couple of months, and I look forward to hearing from you. And thanks again, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.